believe will really open up enterprise level API security tools to organizations of all sizes. Now, before we kick off proceedings properly, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. We will have time for questions at the end. So if you didn't submit a question upon registering, you can still ask us via the chat function on the YouTube stream. We will do our very best to get to all of your questions at the end of the webinar. Also, we will share a recording of the event, so there's no need to worry about taking notes or screen grabbing as we go. Now, as you'll see, we're joined here today by two very familiar faces. Timo Rüppell, our VP of Product, who has led the development of this new free plan, as well as our CEO and co-founder, Jeremy Snyder. As I said, over the next 45 minutes, we're going to show you everything you need to know about this free tier. But as a special treat today, we're also thrilled to welcome a very special guest host, Thomas Martin. Thomas is the founder of Nephosec, where he and his team partner with companies of all shapes and sizes to ensure the secure adoption of cloud technologies. Prior to Nephosec, Thomas was both a technologist and chief information officer at General Electric, and over his career, he has led the migration of 9,000 plus legacy workloads to public and private cloud infrastructure. Since leaving GE in 2017, Thomas has dedicated his efforts to helping companies by sharing his in-depth expertise and insights related to enterprise cloud adoption, application migration, and the management of cloud technologies at scale. Thomas's company, Nephosec, is both a FireTail customer and partner, and that's why we're so excited to have him here with us today. As a customer and active user of FireTail, we know he'll bring a very unique perspective, and he'll ask all of the questions that you really want answered. Thomas, thank you so much for joining us today.
Alan, thank you. It's great to be here. What an exciting day. Anxious to hear more about the free tier launch.
Awesome. Well, look, we really appreciate your help with this. Before I hand over the controls and leave things in your very capable hands, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about Nephosec. Like, what do you do, who do you serve, and what are the core problems that you solve?
Sure, Alan. So as you mentioned, Nephosec was launched in 2017. And ultimately, we work with companies of all sizes, but primarily our customer base is mostly the enterprise level customer. And we actually help them build out and implement as hands-on keyboard their overall cloud security program. And that includes all aspects from the configuration of individual resources to the whole shift left program and being able to deploy safe infrastructure. But that's continued to expand to also include the FireTail product line and API security. So we're super excited.
Brilliant. Well, look, that's super interesting, and I think it's safe to say that you get to see a lot of cloud and application security challenges up close. How important are APIs in what you do, and what's important when it comes to API security, and what has your experience been with FireTail?
Sure. So, Alan, this has been ultimately a journey, right? Over the past, even at the time that I had at General Electric, we knew early on that trying to manage security at scale was going to represent a challenge. And I think most organizations have begun to not only mature through the basics of managing visibility as well as remediation of non-conforming resources and that what we call drift. And now most are beginning to shift left. But I think what's super important in that is it's not only about that infrastructure as code, right? And I think we're going to learn and talk a little bit more here with Jeremy about not only the importance of APIs, but how ultimately everything has become an API first, not only a technology, but organizations. In the way that we interact with our own tooling and some of the security tools that we build out, or whether it's working with some of the products like Rapid7's inside CloudSec or Wiz.io, we're interacting via API constantly. So I wouldn't call it the new frontier, but it's the frontier that needs to be secure.
It's the one that matters most. Awesome. Well, look, I think it's very obvious that we've got the right man for the job today. So without further ado, Thomas, I will gladly let you take the reins, and thanks again for your help with this. Really pleased to have you with us today.
Very good. Thank you, Alan. So now I get to spend a little time here with the team. So Jeremy, Timo, thanks for being here, and thanks for having me on to talk with you guys a bit today. But why don't we start, Jeremy, just look as the co-founder, CEO of the company. Can you tell us a little bit more about the FireTail mission, especially for those who are maybe just learning about FireTail today or here in the future?
Yeah, Thomas, thanks. And we really are on a mission to secure the world's APIs. I mean, we think that APIs are critically important for the modern internet and the way that data is flowing on the modern internet today. And we really want to make it as easy as possible for anybody to get, the level of API security that they need. So when we think about, for instance, why API security is becoming so critical, there's a couple things in there. And you mentioned one of them, which definitely resonates with me. And it's part of why we started the company. It's that it's a journey. And for many organizations, it starts as an initial journey to the cloud. And then it goes through these kinds of phases of realization, right? You realize that there's a benefit to getting out of physical infrastructure management. But then you realize that there's actually a further benefit to getting into kind of the elastic, ephemeral nature of the cloud. Your workloads can be more efficient. They can actually run more in line with the demand. They can scale up, scale down, scale out, scale in, all those things that you hear as promises for why you move to the cloud in the first place. They all do become real, but it often takes organizations time to get there. When they get there, they often go through kind of what I think of as almost like a second digital transformation that happens on the cloud, or you can think of it as going like from cloud 1.0 to cloud 2.0, where you've gone from that server model into a more cloud native model. And typically when you make that transition, you end up with a lot more APIs. You end up with a classic microservice architecture. You end up with applications talking to each other over services. And in fact, right now, one of the things that you'll see is that actually more than 80% of all internet requests are API calls. Now, that's not our statistic. That comes from a number of large scale network monitoring organizations like Akamai, like Cloudflare, et cetera, who have visibility onto internet scale traffic, right? And so, yeah. And, I think a lot of people don't realize that. I often use the example of something like mobile food delivery. And I've talked to engineers at mobile food delivery companies, and we went through one order, one transaction, right? Where you're ordering food to be delivered to your home, hotel, wherever you are, your office, et cetera. We started counting how many API calls went into that one transaction. We got to 30. And then we also started thinking about what's in those API calls. And you think about, oh, well, actually, your payment processing, sending your credit card information to a payment processor, that's an API call. Oh, sending your home address to a delivery driver who's going to actually pick up the food and bring it to your location with your sensitive PII in it, that's another API call. And so that's why API security is so important. And that's why we wanted to make it available for everybody. We think that APIs are powering the modern internet. They make the modern internet possible the way that it is designed today. But it also means that every piece of data, every function call will end up over an API at some point.
Yes. No, I love that again, that kind of that expansion on the whole journey. As soon as you begin interacting with those services, certainly it's like every single thing is. It's just they are all APIs. And so with that, let's talk a little bit more about why FireTail.
Yeah, when we started that mission and we started this journey to build the company, and we said, hey, we want to secure the world's APIs, we didn't put any qualifiers on that. We didn't say we want to secure the world's APIs only for the top enterprise companies that can afford to pay a huge amount of money per year. We said anybody. And when you look at most startups and small organizations, they may be providing a very valuable critical service. They may not have the resources in place, whether it is the expertise or let's say the bandwidth to build a solution of their own, or even maybe the money to buy a solution, right? We wanted to make it so that they don't have to make that trade-off of where do they invest their resources. We wanted to make it so that they could get best-in-class API security for some of the most critical functions and pieces of what they're building at a price point that literally is zero. And that is why we kind of really set this out.
Well, I'm anxious to hear more on that note. I think one of the things you just highlighted is certainly just because of your company size doesn't make your API any less important to the other customer's API, right? It's still that sensitive data that's required to run a lot of great apps. So
yeah, absolutely.
Let's get to the heart of why we're here today, and that is you're launching the free tier, and you just hit on a lot of the facts that you want to be able to get it out to a broader set. But let's kind of deep dive that on as to not only why now, but also I think which will lead into really the product set, but why the free tier?
Yeah. Like I said, making it available to organizations of all size and really, wherever you are in your API security journey is really the primary motivation. We see organizations tackle this in many different ways. We see companies that start from a shift left, let's focus on secure by design, et cetera. And we see companies who take more of a reactive mode because, let's say, they've already gotten ahead a little bit and they've already launched APIs out into production, and now they're in a reactive mode and they need to kind of look at securing what they built. We looked at how we could take all of that and put it into one package and really create an end-to-end API security offering. And then again, when we looked at, how do we engage with all of those organizations wherever they are on that security journey, we thought the easiest way was to just open the doors, let them in. And that is really, coupled with our drive to secure the world's APIs and make this available for organizations of any size. We thought that journey was really important to think about in terms of inviting people in wherever they are in that journey and let them come in, figure out what are some of the challenges that they're facing, what are some of the benefits, by the way. We see customers who are getting value in as little as 15 minutes by connecting their systems up to FireTail. But going through that kind of life cycle and engaging with them, meeting them where they're at on the security journey, that's really another big reason for why we're doing this.
I think, and not to belabor that, but I think one of the things that just hit me as you were talking about that too is so many folks, and I mean, you and I have been talking this for a long time, right? And I've seen the challenges that customers have, not only trying to just identify the number of APIs that they have, but most folks just don't even understand the need for security in relationship to the API. It's just not thought about the way the rest of the infrastructure is. And I think one of the great things you guys are going to help do from here forward is just around the education front of what does it look like to secure an API. So if you don't mind, I want to take a few minutes with Timo, right? We're going to talk a little bit more about product. So let's go through some of these free tier features. You guys been working it so hard in the background. So let's learn a little bit more about, first off, so who's this for? We know it's for anybody, but what does that ultimately mean?
Yeah, that's true. So we obviously had a certain type of person in mind when we were thinking about the features of the free tier and what sort of to offer. And as Jeremy said, we want this to be extremely low barrier to entry for anybody signing up. The main idea here is obviously that we want to give this powerful tool to, for example, individual developers who are working on either a small application or their own passion project, open source project, what have you. But also make it work for, let's say, a project engineer in a larger organization who has his own little domain and wants to see how they can take steps towards securing the APIs that they're providing, for example, internally to the rest of the organization.
Sure.
So this is basically the way that we tailored this with respect to all of the sort of available features and sort of possible limitations that are in there.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, so with that, we now know who it's for. What all is going to be included as part of the free tier?
All right. Yeah. So obviously, what we include is not just sort of a very limited set. We're actually going rather broadly. There are some sort of things that we keep for the enterprise tier. We don't think that individual developers have need for a Splunk integration, for example, but obviously the things that we're going to talk about later in the demo is all included, discovery in different cloud environments, the logging integrations for the different cloud environments, our findings engine that will tell you if something is wrong with your API, all that sort of stuff, the base functionality of FireTail as a security tool is all there for you to use. We do have slightly lower retention times of 7 days for data retention. We limit to 1 million API calls and 5 APIs. This is plenty enough to get you started. And obviously, if you have more, then there are sort of starter tiers available that you can then slowly upgrade to and migrate to more quantity of those things.
Sure. Very cool. Well, I know we are definitely going to get to see a lot more next. So from a platform demo perspective, let's just go ahead and start with discovery. So let me turn over the reins here, and let's learn more about discovery.
Yeah, sure thing, Thomas. And, Timo kind of mentioned it earlier, and I think you might have mentioned it as well. A lot of customers, when they come talk to us, they don't even know how many APIs they have. Yeah. And so from a FireTail perspective, that is, yeah. And so, most customers have the same thing. So from that perspective, what you're seeing right now is the way that most customers go through this or start with us is integrating with one or more of the cloud providers that they are working with. That could be AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Platform. On those platforms, it's a simple identity and access management integration. And what it does is it scans environments, typically looking at network layers for signals where we can pick up APIs. If you happen to be a Wiz customer, we can actually directly integrate with that as well, find your APIs out of there. These are generally very straightforward integrations. They'll take you less than 15 minutes to launch. And last but not least, you can actually connect directly to your GitHub code repositories. And we can find APIs as early as kind of the build and design phase. We do require multi-factor authentication, by the way, but you can scan either all of your repositories or only select ones if you're only interested in certain parts of your code base. And what that's going to do is it's going to find all those APIs and bring them into FireTail. And that's the discovery process in a nutshell. It's pretty straightforward. And like I said, most of these integrations take less than 10 minutes to deploy.
Yes, and I will vouch for that. And I will say again, I was just amazed at the number that we had. But I was also super impressed to not only know about them, but to have it in one location and then to learn more about not only, and we're going to get to that, I know, but the traffic and their potential vulnerabilities. So, okay, so tell me a little bit more about code libraries and plugins too.
Yeah, so code libraries and plugins is actually both an alternate way of discovering APIs. So let's say you're working with APIs that aren't on one of the cloud providers or can't be discovered by one of those other methods. Yeah. We've got libraries for some of the most popular modern code languages that are used for API, kind of modern API development, I would say. Sure. These are, drop-in line, 15 to 20 lines of integration code. And they will both report the API back into FireTail. So it goes into that same kind of discovery process. It's very simple. You go through the process of creating an API, and then you can just, pull out a key there. We also have integrations with leading tools like Nginx or API 6, et cetera. These are kind of plugin modules. A similar process, create a token, you drop it in line. These will report the APIs into FireTail as well. So that's an alternate route if you've got APIs that aren't going to be discovered through one of those previous integrations with the cloud providers.
Okay. Well, Timo, let's pop over to you a little bit. So we've talked about discovery, but let's kind of dig in here a little bit and talk a little bit more about the inventory and what that ultimately means.
Yeah, sure. So as Jeremy said, once you set up one of those cloud integrations, FireTail will group all the APIs that are discovered into a single application. So here, for example, this is Azure, the different APIs that we discover there, or for example, GitHub here, right? So GitHub repository scanning. You can always see all of your APIs in the API tab, and this sort of brings a unified view, regardless of where the APIs are coming from. So here we have REST and gateways, for example. And we show them to you in a sort of single place. We also collect additional metadata for each of these, depending on the resource and the environment. Like we get different amounts of metadata. That was what we get for API Gateway. Another example, for Azure, we do get a little bit more different kinds of information, endpoints, resource IDs, things that make it easy for you to track back to the resource there. We also extract, whenever possible, the actual API specification. So that way FireTail can know about, the routes and methods, the parameters, responses, all that sort of stuff in an API, and also give that information to you when you want to look at your APIs.
Yeah. Full inventory, ability to pull it into individual applications, which then I'm sure the individual teams can evaluate. Okay, we got it. We know about it. Now, how are we going to figure out whether we have issues from a security perspective?
Yeah, for most customers, that actually leads right into the next part, which is posture management. And I like to think of posture management as kind of, discover, build an inventory, and then assess that inventory.
Yeah.
What does happen in a lot of cases, though, is that customers end up having more issues than they realize. And so the API security posture management module here in FireTail allows you to kind of sort by severity level, for instance, and then you can deep dive in and figure out, with a pretty detailed description and a mapping to the OWASP API top 10, what types of issues you have. In many cases, you can get right to the code line level in the API spec. You can also do things like filter by severity, time, etc. You can download CSVs that are Excel compatible. So if you need to, build an internal inventory or report, etc. And there's actually a second type of assessment that goes in, not only the spec analysis. We've got these managed scans of APIs because we've pulled in the metadata that Timo showed previously from the inventory. We know where the APIs live. We can actually send simulated traffic to the APIs and discover where they have issues.
Wow.
And last but not least, we have the ability to kind of track changes over time. So we can see that when a particular change, in this case, we're looking at, I think it is the creation of a new API, or here it is a code commit into a specific repository. We know the timestamp, we know who did it, we know which API it is, and we know the impact of each change on the environment. So that's the last really important thing to understand, is that FireTail is tracking environments for change and keeping up to date with the current state of your inventory.
So with all of those changes and tracking and things changing, as we know, in the cloud dynamically, constantly, I'm guessing we're going to need to pull some log data.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah. So
you guys knew what I was thinking.
Exactly. Yeah. Obviously, getting logs into FireTail starts off, as Jeremy already said, like the libraries have a dual function. They also include logging functionality. So when you set up a project with a FireTail library, you set it up with an API key that takes care of shipping logs to us. Yeah. But also for the cloud environment, similar to the discovery integrations, we have integrations for the different resource types like load balancers and gateways in the various cloud environments that are easy to set up. And that will then effectively set up a log shipping element from those environments to FireTail, right? And so once you've set those up, all of the logs come in the dashboard. You can also view them on a per API basis, per application basis. But we do sort of normalize them and make them uniform and sort of easy to compare. And we enrich the logs as well. Yes. So you see these tags that we have here. So this is, for example, has elements of being generated by a bot. There's a missing referrer, etc. This is a health check endpoint. So with these tags, you can start building up real powerful filters for your logs. So here we're going through a quick example of checking for logs that come from a public IP address, but which do have the tags of cross-site scripting or SQL injection attacks, right? So this is very easy to set up, as you can see here, with the tags that are done with our enrichment process. And once you've set up the filter, you just submit it and it'll filter the logs down to what are now suspected injection attacks or cross-site scripting attacks. And here again, like, because we have sort of the full context, you can see the response and the request object. Here you see the item that tripped our sensors is visible here in the header information. We do IP enrichment as well, so you can see where this request was coming from by geography, for example, or by organization that owns the IP address. And so this gives you a very powerful tool to analyze your data, right?
Mhm.
And then you can obviously also save these filters and share them with your team. So once you sort of spend 15 minutes or half an hour building up a filter, that work isn't lost. You can actually, give it to somebody else in the team and tell them to, work with that, for example. So that's sort of the logging and the observability that you get from the logging in FireTail.
Yeah, and I'll just say, as a customer, I think it's what's been interesting for us. And look, everybody's journey is going to be different, right? But I'll tell you, as we have adopted the tool, I'd say, the initial part is, and look, our APIs don't like change from a code-based perspective like daily, right? So it's just, our shop isn't quite that dynamic. But I'll tell you, upon launch, post-launch and discovery, for us, it was going through and understanding the vulnerabilities that existed in our APIs, repairing those. And then once we knew we were good, now it's just part of our release process to go through pre-release, at that post-discovery portion to look at, did we introduce any errors? But honestly, Timo, just the logs, we're using those constantly to evaluate, is there anything else that we need to be thinking about from our API perspective? So the long-term constant tail of benefit is there. Well, look, but we also can't live in the tool every day. And so I need to be, I gotta know if there's an issue. So Jeremy, tell me about how I'm gonna learn if there's issues.
Yeah, and to your point, we don't expect customers to live in FireTail every day. That is not the goal. Our goal in building the platform is to actually meet you where you are. I mentioned that earlier from the standpoint of your API security journey, but that should also be true from the standpoint of what's your working environment. What are the tools that you do spend the most time in? And so from that perspective, Timo went through the process of kind of building out a set of filters that can kind of filter down log files. Well, those filters can, with a couple clicks, be turned into an alert. And so here we can see an alert. It's built off of some pre-existing filters. You simply set the thresholds that you're interested in looking at. And you can use any of the different kind of classifiers that we use here. That could be the number of calls. It could be the size of payloads. It can be execution time, header size, etc. And you can use any of these operators, greater than, less than, etc. You can also filter that down additionally. So let's say you only cared about APIs that are in production. You want to turn off repeat alarms, things like that. And then you're going to get that alert with rich contextual information somewhere that you live. That might be Slack, that might be Teams, that might be in a ticketing system. You might actually have an outbound API call that you want to send to some other internal tooling that you're using. And one other little thing that we do there, and I know it kind of passed off of the screen pretty quickly, was that we do actually show you a preview of an alert that you're about to unleash. So if you're about to turn on the noisy kind of spam bot alert, we will actually show you what your historical data indicates with that. Because alert fatigue is a real thing in security, and you never want to turn on the alert that is going to just, hit the same Slack channel every 30 minutes, because people will tune that out very, very quickly. So all of the controls and the ability to kind of tweak that to whatever the right channel is for you, whatever the right frequency is for you, whatever the right threshold is for you, all of those tools are in there in the alerting system.
I think that's great. To your point, it really is a real thing. And I think that ability to throttle that and get a preview of it is huge. Well, look, as you mentioned, so you've already got it up on the screen, customer support. So look, this sounds amazing. I think most people probably have the impression that, with free comes nothing. And so I think let's talk a little bit about, if I'm signing up here later today after watching this webinar, what can I expect from a support perspective, especially if I'm struggling to get started?
Yeah, for the free tier, we did look at how are we going to make this as easy as possible for as broad an audience as possible. And so to that point, we've really spent a lot of time focusing on making sure that our documentation is, as thorough as it can be, as up-to-date as it can be, as complete as it can be, and as accurate as it can be. All of that documentation is publicly accessible. You can find that at firetail.io/docs. It's also linked from our homepage. Also, from inside the FireTail product, Each individual page has a direct hot link out to the corresponding documentation page.
Great.
So whenever you're on a screen, like the integration screen or like the posture management screen, if you look in the top right, you'll actually see a little link that'll open a new browser tab directly to the corresponding documentation page. We've got videos, we've got how-to guides for most every topic that you'll need in getting up and running on your own. If you do run into any issues, you've got kind of two channels that you can reach out to us. One is that email address that you see on the screen there, super easy, support@firetail.io. I don't think anybody can really, struggle to guess that email address. But then also within the product, there is a chat function. So that should be on the lower right-hand side. Looks like a little speech bubble that you'll see on many, many websites.
Yep.
I will tell you that actually goes directly to a place that is monitored by quite a lot of the FireTail team.
Yeah.
So you should get, a response there in a pretty reasonable time frame, unless we're, particularly busy at any moment. But,
Sure.
Generally speaking, those are the best three channels to reach out and get support.
And just even as a customer, I'll have to be honest, because it doesn't really, like most websites, it doesn't kind of irritate you, right? In the sense of like, there is no pop-up that says, hey, I'm here. And so that actual chat functionality is one that we didn't know initially to even use.
Yeah.
So definitely great to have that there. Well, look, guys, this sounds amazing. So let's figure out how do folks get started?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the way to get started is to just go on to FireTail.app and click the Start Trial button. You'll end up here and click on the Get Set Up button. You can sign up by Google single sign-on. You can also sign on with email and password, as I'm demonstrating here. There are some restrictions for the password, obviously, and we do require two-factor authentication. So set that up with your mobile phone or as here with your password manager. And once you've gone through these steps and hoops of setting up your two-factor authentication, you will receive an email with an activation link, right? So you'll be put into this sort of waiting state, and then you can pop over to your email, and there should be a friendly welcoming message with a link to click, and you'll be asked to authenticate again with the 2FA key. Yep. And once that is done, there may be an additional browser tab that's left open from the process, but you can then just head on into the application. You can close the other browser tabs. You head on into the application, and you'll be presented with the opportunity to create an organization. So that is where you start off. And for each organization that you create, you need to select a plan. And here is where you select a name, and the next step will be presented to you as a free tier plan already selected, and you just get started. And you see all of the stuff that we've been talking about, the discovery integrations, the code libraries, the notification integration, etc. You can always go back to the org management and check out your subscription, again, if you need to upgrade, etc. But that's like, it really only takes a couple of minutes to get in. As you yourself said, like maybe 5 to 10 minutes to set up a cloud integration, and you're off to the races. We purposefully tried to make this as smooth as possible.
Yes. Well, and I think one of the clarifiers, and it's not a clarifier, it's just a maybe an exclamation point. FireTail.app. I know we're going to show the QR code, but the main website is .io. To sign up is .app. Very good.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But that start trial button on FireTail.io will take you right to .app, and you can get in through there. So if you can't remember FireTail.app, don't worry. It shouldn't be too hard to find.
Exactly. This is the joy of being a tech startup and having too many domain names available.
Yeah. Fair point. Well, guys, amazing stuff. Let's get to some questions. I know there's a couple have popped in, and so I'm actually going to start with one that is fresh. And Jeremy, this is to you. You mentioned the OWASP top 10. For those who may not be completely familiar with API security, what is that framework? Who controls it? What's the top 10?
Yeah. So it's controlled by a nonprofit organization called OWASP. I have to admit that I often get the exact what does OWASP stand for wrong. So I'm just pulling it up. Open Worldwide
I didn't
Application
even know you were going to
Security
go that far
Project.
with it. So good for you.
But
I hate acronyms.
So it's an application security project, and it's kind of a consortium in nonprofit organization. And what they do is they look at different application structures and they try to help people understand for each technology category, what are the top 10 risks or threats around that. So for instance, large language models, AI is a very, very hot topic. So they came out with hey, what are the top 10 risks and threats around AI? And then, APIs has been a topic for a little while.
Yeah.
The initial version of the OWASP API Top 10, which is, again, just a list of the top 10 threats and risks around APIs. First version came out in 2019. There was an update last year in 2023. And inside FireTail, when you look at our findings, you will see that the findings map to an item on that top 10 list. And we'll actually show you both the 2019 version and the 2023 version, just so you know what that mapping is. But that's what the OWASP API Top 10 is. Amazing.
One of the things, and this is maybe bonus points when you guys send out stuff, but I do really love FireTail has a breach tracker, right? This is a me question. This wasn't.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little just for a moment about the breach tracker that you guys are doing. To me, again, more education back to the community.
Yeah, it's something that we started when we started the company, and we did it for a couple of reasons. One is it's just really interesting research data for our own team to look at, to understand how, where, why our organization's getting breached on their APIs and kind of what's the impact, right? And there's always a caveat that goes into these kind of things, which is that we only hear about the ones that get disclosed publicly.
Great
right
point.
And so it may not be complete. In fact, I can 99.9% guarantee you it's not a complete listing of every organization that's been breached, but it's been super informative from understanding how are attackers getting into APIs. And we kind of look at that time and again with each new breach incident that comes in, and we can kind of start to understand not only from the OWASP API Top 10 perspective, what are the risks and threats, but from what's going on out there. Yeah. And you'll hear terms like threat-informed defense and, secure data-driven security design, things like that I've heard in various kind of talks and conferences. Yeah. And it really is something that we subscribe to because it is, you want to build a solution that actually solves the problems. And the easiest way to see that is by tracking what's happening out there. So that's on our website. The link is in the footer of firetail.io. We also prepare an annual report where we take data from that tracker, we analyze it, we look at kind of, top breach vectors, primary, secondary causes, some of the statistics around it, the growth rate and the number of attacks over the years, which is way up, by the way. Like if you look at 2020, from 2020 onward, every year, it's not only gone up, but the rate of increase has gone up, right? And so it's really is kind of a compounding effect. And one of the other kind of crazy things that I'll mention, and I don't want to go too deep into it, people are more than welcome to download it for free off of our website. You should be able to find that pretty easily. But one of the other things I'll mention is that when we see API data breaches, they tend to be because of a design flaw in the API. And what that means is that the entire data set behind the API is usually vulnerable to exfiltration or scraping. Yeah. And so the size measured by volume or number of records extracted is actually more than 10x higher than across the broad kind of the broad average of breach events across the technology space.
And I think one of the things just to build on that a moment is you talked about this exponential growth. It should also be a very large call to action, right? I mean, so as companies and organizations get better at securing the rest of the cloud, this is the next piece of yarn to pull on, right? Yeah. And back to your point, I don't even have to breach the bucket. If I can infiltrate via the flaw in the API, there's a strong chance you're not even going to see it come across. So definitely a call to action. So it's also good to know. I mean, so this is coming through here now. And by the way, I should have mentioned to anybody in the audience right now, we're taking these live. So if you guys have additional questions that you didn't submit, a few of these were submitted with the form submissions. But if you guys have questions as we go along, please. Timo, this one's to you. What does 7-day log retention ultimately mean?
Yeah, sure. So that basically means that when you ship logs to the FireTail platform, that starts a timer for each of the logs, and we will retain that for 7 days. So that's enough time for you to filter, get alerted on. It's also enough time for you to get the logs off the platform if you need to store them for longer. But this is like a conscious decision to not become a platform for log storage, right?
Sure.
It's also good for you as a sort of like from a security perspective, that the logs don't stick around. Obviously, for the sort of like starter tiers and enterprise tiers, the log retention times are longer, but they're also capped at reasonable times.
Sure.
Because we don't want to log information can be sensitive, and we treat it as such. So we're very careful about retaining those for unspecified times.
Sure. And I guess it's related, but let's just say, I mean, because the next thing I was going to ask you is ultimately, what if I have more than 5 APIs? And Jeremy, you can probably cover that, but I'm going to keep it on Timo for just a second. So what if I only have 5 APIs, but organizationally, I really think it's important, I want longer log data? Is there differences between the free tier and the other tier in regards to logging?
Sure, yeah. So
okay.
the main things that change between the tiers is exactly the number of APIs that you get, the number of ingested logs per month, and the retention times. Okay. There's some additional small variations, like the enterprise level notification integrations, as I mentioned, for example, Splunk or Wiz, right? Yeah. Those things are for enterprise customers. We don't see individual people necessarily even having those. If there is like a need for you to specifically modify or have like a customized set of restrictions or sort of quotas in place, just send us an email and we can figure something out, I think. Yeah.
Thanks on that, Timo. Well, so Jeremy, I mean, as we were kind of talking there, all right, so I get in, I start doing ingestion and I got more than 5. What if I got more than 5 APIs?
Yeah, that is where the limits of the free tier kind of kick in, right? And to that point, during the sign up process, you probably will have seen, it might have gone through the screen pretty quickly, but you will have seen there are kind of starter, business, enterprise tiers also available. And look, if you're in that kind of middle ground where you're looking at it and you're like, oh boy, that's a big step up for our organization, but we really value what we're getting out of FireTail, like Timo said, just reach out.
Yeah.
We have the ability to create kind of custom plans for different sizes, for different scales. And especially if you're coming from a startup or an academic institution or a nonprofit, we definitely offer kind of specialized pricing and plans for those types of organizations. Just reach out to us, support@firetail.io, or chat to us through the app. We'll be happy to work something out with you.
Great stuff. Well, for those who maybe didn't fully understand, how can they get started with the code libraries? And either one of you guys can grab this one.
That's a good question. So all of our code libraries are actually open source and on GitHub. So a good starting point would be just to go to FireTail's GitHub at github/firetail-io.
Okay.
So the repositories are there. So they all include documentation for how to get started and set them up in a code project. Obviously, also the on-platform instructions are available. So if you set up a FireTail account, you have access to those. But they're mainly designed to work off API specifications and help you construct a safe and secure API, right? That's the main idea there. And then obviously setting up a free tier account on FireTail lets you do the log shipping and all the good stuff as well there. But yeah, we try to keep them easy to integrate, just a tiny bit of coding required.
Very cool. Well, this one just popped in from the audience. We flashed the screen up and I'm sure that the team can slow it down and look at it, but The question is, what integrations do we have to modern software team tools, ticketing, tracking, reporting? I know Slack and Teams has been mentioned. And then I guess I'm going to build on the question a little bit. And even if it doesn't exist today, are there any plans ultimately to maybe build out even some API access to do custom integrations?
Yeah, I'll take the first part of that, which is the existing integrations, and then Timo can talk about that second part, if that's okay. So first of all, integrations, if you go to firetail.io/docs, you will see the category of integrations. But off the top of my head, the ones that I know about, and I might forget one or two, but from a notification perspective, you've got Slack and Teams, and you've got email. And I think you have two flavors of email. We have, you can use your own SMTP service, or you can use ours, which is going to come off of Amazon Web Services. So if you're kind of in an organization where you might be flagging emails, know that that is one of the sources where they might be coming from. From a ticketing perspective, Jira, PagerDuty, ServiceNow. From a SIM perspective, Splunk. And I think that should cover most of them on the existing integration side. You do also have the ability to, in any of those integrations, all of the data that you saw collected, meaning, let's say, things like, if it's an alert, things like the number of calls that tripped the threshold, things like that, or the payload size that tripped the threshold, like those can all be embedded into the payload that gets sent into your ticketing system. Or if it's something like a finding, it is like, oh, this endpoint doesn't have authentication. That can again be included in like, the Jira task that gets created out of the FireTail finding. So they are, context rich. And then one other thing I'll say is that there is also the ability to send an outbound API call with, again, that same data in the payload. So that is inside the product as I think it's called an HMAC signed API integration. And Timo, you can take it away on the other side.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, like, the HMAC signed API webhook call is basically the first step to just building your own, right? That should work with most any other platform. There's also one additional thing that we offer, which is you can trigger a Lambda function that'll get all of the context as well. And basically there, like Bob's your uncle, you can do pretty much anything you want.
I was just going to say, that basically just opened up the world. So check.
That covers everything. Obviously, for our customers, most of our integrations are developed with customer interests in mind. So if you're a customer and have a tool that you're using, reach out, and we might be able to work something out. We have a crack team of developers on hand, and they'll happily crank out one of those integrations in no time.
Very good. Well, guys, there may be a couple more questions popping in. As they do, we'll get those sent out, and I know you guys can follow up. But look, wow, what an exciting day. Thanks for all the great information. Congratulations to both of you on the launch of the free tier. Jeremy, let me just hand it back to you. I want to be mindful of time, so take us home.
Well, there's really not much more to say, is there? I mean, I think we've covered quite a lot, and we even went a couple minutes long, and I was thinking halfway through, oh boy, I think we're going to finish early, but the Q&A was really great. Look, I really appreciate you taking the time, Thomas. It really means a lot for you as a continued, and I think, pretty long-term, one of our very first customers to come on board, for you to share your experiences and to take the time to join us here today. For all of you watching, thank you also for your time, attention, for the questions that you sent in. I'll leave the QR code up on screen here. And as Alan mentioned at the very beginning, this session is being recorded, so it will be available for replay. If there's stuff that you need to go back and have a look at, you'll be able to do that to your heart's content, I think, on YouTube just very, very shortly here. Thomas, Timo, thank you for taking the time. Alan, thank you for the introduction at the beginning. And to our audience, first and foremost, thank you for taking the time. Please feel free to share this around to any other organizations and people that you know who might also be interested. We'd love to get your feedback, and we really do welcome you on board the FireTail free tier. With that, I will say on behalf of myself and the team, signing off, thank you again. Bye-bye.